So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I'm taking a little break from young Earth creationism. I felt myself getting a little burnt out on it, so I figured I'd just not. But while I'm a bit burnt out on young Earth creationism, I'm not burnt out on making videos or debunking. So that meant finding some nonsense that isn't anything related to anything Answers in Genesis would recognize. So today, we're looking at a video from Mud Fossil University, which is as much our university as Prager University. Although, that might not be a fair comparison. Roger, the man who runs Mud Fossil University, has, to my knowledge, never argued that it was okay for Christopher Columbus to be a slave monger. So I guess he's at least a step ahead of Dennis Prager. Now, Roger's normal shtick is to look at some rock, decide that it looks like a body part, occasionally not even a real body part, but one that he made up, and then declaring that it is that body part. He thinks lava is poop. He thinks the blood falls in Antarctica are actually blood. And he thinks that the entire western coast of North America, from Baja California to the tip of the Aleutian Islands, is the body of one colossal scorpion. Today, though, he's not here for geology, but for actual biology, or rather his fevered ravings about biology. Well, let's see what he's got for us.
Okay, my friends, this is kind of exciting. I think I have answers to the problems we're having right now with autism and all the different health issues.
The only problem with autism that I'm seeing is people who think autism is a problem to be solved and not a variation in human cognition to be recognized. Autistic people aren't a problem, they are simply forced to exist in a world that is not designed for them. I guarantee that if you're neurotypical and went to an island nation populated predominantly by autists, that you'd find it weird and confusing, and they would be getting along just fine. To the degree that there is in fact a problem, it's that the rest of the world needs to meet people with autism where they are, recognize their humanity, and treat them with the love, dignity, and compassion that should be our default towards all humans.
Virtually all of them are related to enzymes that come from bacteria.
Well, autism sure as hell isn't, nor are many other diseases, like any viral disease or any genetic disease. I would love to know which bacterial enzyme causes HIV or progeria. Also note that his source for this is literally just the Google search results for the query, "Do bacteria create ribosomes that carry enzymes?" And it looks like he's reading from the AI section. You know, the section that just makes up shit that sounds plausible regardless of whether or not it's true, because the shoggoff behind the mask of the response doesn't know or care what is true. Now, of course, a ribosome is a subcellular structure which is responsible for protein synthesis. It's basically a bit of RNA surrounded by protein structures. It takes bits of RNA and then uses them as a chemical template to construct protein molecules from amino acids. An enzyme is any chemical which facilitates a chemical reaction, usually by speeding it up or lowering the activation energy needed for it to occur. So you could say that ribosomes are enzymes that produce enzymes and other proteins, but they don't really carry enzymes.
In essence, bacteria utilize their ribosomes, which I will show you in a minute.
I look forward to being shown a ribosome by the guy who thinks that North Africa is a giant fish corpse.
To build the protein enzymes that carry out a wide range of essential biochemical reactions within the bacterial cell.
Yep, that's a pretty good summary of what a ribosome does in the context of enzymes and bacteria, which is what he asked for. Ribosomes also make non-enzyme proteins like structural proteins, and are also found in eukaryotes and archaeans, not just bacteria.
You have to have these bacteria producing enzymes, or you will fall over dead in 2 steps.
I don't know about 2 steps, but yes, bacteria are a vital part of biology for animals, primarily in their guts, where the bacteria break down biochemicals that the animals themselves do not have enzymes for. So I think it would be less 2 steps and more of a slow starvation if all your bacteria died. But either way, it wouldn't be good.
Okay, my friends, this is as serious as it gets. Disease is running crazy, and they really don't have a whole lot of solutions.
That's a relative thing. Nothing going on right now is even close to things like the plague of Justinian or the Black Death. And that's because we have better preventative medicine, more diseases can be cured, and we have more effective symptom management. Medical technology has never been more advanced than it is right now.
And some of the solutions are so costly, you can't afford to do them even if they did work.
Yeah, that's a political choice. Those things, at least in developed countries, could be made available to everyone who needs them. In fact, in most of the developed world, they are.
Now, what is the root cause of all of this?
There isn't a single root cause. That's why disease is tricky. Cancer is caused by mutations. Some infections are viral, some are bacterial, some are by eukaryotic parasites, some diseases are genetic. Each disease is unique. There is no silver bullet that will cure or prevent all disease. There never will be, and anyone trying to sell you such a silver bullet is a scammer.
It's ATP synthase, which means
the root of all disease is the enzyme that allows for the production of ATP. That's in all living cells, bacteria and otherwise. How the f*** could that be the root of all disease?
ATP is the energy that runs virtually everything in your body.
That's true.
ATP is the molecule that stores chemical energy in cells for immediate use.
And it is produced in copious quantities if the bacteria is there to create the enzyme to create and do the synthesis.
No, you don't need bacteria to make ATP synthase. All eukaryotic cells have their own ATP synthase, which is localized to the mitochondria and uses proton flow to generate energy, which is then stored in ATP, or adenosine triphosphate for you chemistry nerds out there. In fact, it's not even clear to me how it would work if a cell relied on ATP synthase extrinsic to itself. It would have to bring the ATP synthase from the outside through its cell membrane, then through the outer membrane of the mitochondria, to then situate it in the inner membrane, and all for what? What would that get the cell that just making the damn stuff itself wouldn't? I'm not sure that Roger even knows what ATP synthase is. In fact, no, given that it's Roger, I'd honestly be shocked if he actually knew what ATP is, what an enzyme is, what a ribosome is, what a mitochondrion is, or what ATP synthase is.
The enzyme is the key. ATP synthase, that enzyme, creates over 1 million years of breakdowns and reassembling.
What the hell does that mean?
Of these chemicals to turn into ATP. Over 1 million years it would take. It does it in 1 second.
I guess this is just Roger's obtuse way of explaining that ATP synthase facilitates the rapid formation of ATP, which would otherwise be orders of magnitude slower. Which, yeah, that is what it does. That's kind of the point of a synthase. You can tell what that class of proteins is from the name. Synth, as in synthesis, and ase is the suffix used in biochemistry for an enzyme. So synthase is an enzyme that helps synthesize a molecule. So ATP synthase is an enzyme that facilitates the synthesis of ATP.
You don't have the enzyme, you don't get the product.
Well, that depends, but at the very least, you don't get it at the rate at which you need it.
If you have a very low count of ATP synthase, you're going to have low count of ATP delivered to your body.
Yeah, that checks out. But what research is there indicating that low ATP availability is linked to all diseases? It's like Roger is just picking something that would admittedly be a problem out of a hat, and then just declaring that it's the only problem. But real researchers have already looked into the causes of disease, and most of them are not caused by an ATP synthase deficiency.
They just did a study. I'm going to show you some things that are just now being discovered, and it really, the whole root cause.
Who did a study? Where was it published? When was it published? I don't know, because so far all we've seen is a single Google search result and a PopSci article about Interstitium, which seems to be Roger's favorite part of animal anatomy. Well, except maybe for vaginas and penises, because he will look at just about any cave and say it's a vagina, and just about any rock pillar and say it's a penis.
Of all of this, if this is true,
which it's not,
and this is what needs to be discovered one way or the other, is the bacteria that creates the enzyme, which makes that 1 million years of chemistry.
Where is Roger getting the idea that ATP synthase is unique to bacteria? They're in every cell I'm aware of, with the possible exception of some myxozoans who have lost their mitochondria.
What bacteria is it, and do you have enough of it?
Roger is the one proposing this. Shouldn't he have at least some clue?
That's not a big thing to do, to figure out. I don't know why it hasn't been done.
Because literally nothing even points to any of this as a bare possibility. ATP synthase isn't unique to bacteria. Most diseases have nothing to do with ATP synthase, and it's not even clear how bacterial ATP synthase would even be transferred to eukaryotic cells like human somatic cells. Further, this would require bacteria to be ubiquitous in the human body, but they just aren't. They're concentrated in a few places, the most important being the gut. The only way that this is even close to resembling something real is that mitochondria can be thought of as bacteria that live inside your cells. They have their own genome, which is loop-shaped like a bacterium. We know they evolved from bacteria, they reproduce much like bacteria do, etc. So unless he's talking about mitochondria, the reason no one has looked into this is because it's lunatic gibberish, and I'm only covering it because, frankly, it's kind of amusing to see just how batshit insane Roger will get.
Because we have found very, very good results, and they have found very, very good results with what they call FMT, which is a bacterial replacement inside your guts.
So FMT is fecal matter transplant. This is an actual example of bacteria being used for medical purposes. As I have previously noted, bacteria are a key part of the digestive system of pretty much every animal that isn't a parasite. Certain events, though, can kill off some of the gut microbiome. For example, diseases that cause lots of diarrhea can simply physically remove gut bacteria. Heavy or broad-spectrum courses of antibiotics can kill off the bacteria in your gut. In such cases, it is important to re-establish the bacterial populations that you depend on. Fecal matter transplants are what they sound like. They are bits of poop with a healthy community of gut bacteria that are placed into the intestines of the patient so that their gut can be recolonized. But that's not going to help you with your eczema, your cold, your Huntington's disease, your strep throat, or your malaria. As I said, there is no silver bullet for all disease, nor will there ever be.
Which is the just natural bacteria that dissolves and breaks down all the food and digests it and makes your body run correctly. That is the key.
Well, it's the key to certain gut-based problems, but again, getting good gut bacteria isn't going to cure your brain tumor.
All right, it's just extremely simple. When you get invaded, it has to come through your skin and then through the membranes.
Well, that is one way in which pathogens can get into your body. That's why you should sterilize wounds before dressing them, and why things like Lyme disease and malaria are so hard to control. In fact, a very good friend of mine was just recently diagnosed with Lyme. So hey, when you're out in places with ticks and mosquitoes, take precautions. Put your socks up over your pants, wear bug repellent. If you're camping, bring mosquito netting if your tent isn't secure against small bugs. But also, pathogens frequently enter your body through the lungs or digestive system. Airborne diseases are caused by pathogens entrained in water droplets that you exhale or expel forcefully when you sneeze, which are then inhaled by someone else. Waterborne diseases, like cholera, are transmitted when someone ingests a contaminated substance like drinking water, and then the pathogen can infect the host through the digestive system.
Which are these fluid-filled highways that have the bacteria and the enzymes that attack these invaders.
He's not wrong that the interstitium is involved in immune response, although I don't know what he means by 2 layers. The interstitium suffuses connective and dermal tissues. It doesn't really have 2 distinct layers, although it does have different components. Its role in immune response is to transport cytokines and antigens, not bacteria. Bacteria are not really part of the immune response.
There's 2 layers. It's what's called a bilipid membrane. There's 2 layers.
Oh, no. He's confusing the interstitial membranes with membranes in cells like the aptly named cell membrane, which are indeed made of 2 layers of lipids, that is fat molecules, with one end being hydrophobic and the other being hydrophilic. This causes the membrane to form with 2 layers of these molecules, with the hydrophobic ends pointing inwards towards the center of the membrane and the hydrophilic ends pointing towards the outside of the cell and towards the inside of the cell. The interstitial membrane is primarily proteinaceous, not made of lipids. It's composed of things like collagen of multiple types and elastin. Those aren't lipids, they're structural proteins.
Of phosphates of gooey stuff in between, where all of this bacteria creates these ribosomes.
No, the interstitium is not the home of some significant community of bacteria, and where the heck did ribosomes come from? Roger said the bacteria were creating ATP synthase, but that's created by a ribosome. It isn't itself a ribosome.
So think of that. You got an upper layer, you got a lower layer.
No, you don't. The interstitium is a complex system of interconnected fluid-filled spaces that are arranged like a lattice, not as some single layer. It's interspersed throughout things like dermal tissue and the spaces between organs. It's not a single layer you could find and peel away if you were peeling off layers of anatomy on a medical school dummy. What he's pointing to isn't even the interstitium, it's part of the epidermis, which doesn't have any interstitial spaces. The interstitium in that picture are the white pockets in the light pink part, which Roger would know if he just took the time to read the caption on that very picture, which is from a Live Science article that I have linked in the description.
And now they're starting to focus on it. And they didn't even know this stuff existed until a few years ago. 2018, they acknowledged it, yes.
That's broadly true. Those spaces were thought to be filled with collagen, and it turns out they're not. The spaces were always known about, though. Or, not always, but since we've had good microscopes, I guess.
Meet your interstitium. I knew about this. I wrote a paper on it in 2015. I said, you guys got to start looking at this.
Roger has never written a paper in his life. He's written lunatic ravings that he has sent to people like Sabina Hossenfelder, herself a pseudoscience apologist, albeit one with a far better grasp on reality than Roger, and who can actually comprehend what she reads, again, unlike Roger. He has also sent his ramblings to real academics, who then routinely block him for harassing them with absolute nonsense. Now look, I don't hate Roger. In fact, I find his sincerity and excitement rather endearing. But the fact is that he is a profoundly stupid individual. In many cases, by choice. His ideas range from unhinged but mostly harmless to dangerous, although most of them are closer to the former than the latter.
And that's where our immunities live. And this is all we have to do is find out what's in here and what bacteria we're missing.
Well, the phrase, where our immunities live, doesn't mean anything. We know what's there: water, salts, antigens, cytokines, collagen, and elastin mostly. And there are no bacteria that we're missing from the interstitium. That's something Roger is making up on seemingly no basis at all. I think he just thought that it was a cool idea, and for Roger, that's all an idea needs to be for him to accept it. Something he thinks is neat.
Because that'll be what enzymes we're missing.
No, bacteria are not just enzyme factories for human tissues. Human cells make their own enzymes from their own ribosomes, as coded for by their own DNA.
And if the enzymes are missing, the chemistry's not going to get done. You're going to be invaded. You're not going to be able to stop yourself.
But the barrier provided by the skin is primarily mechanical, not chemical. Your skin's outer layer is made of dead tissue and is called the epidermis, from epi in Greek meaning upon or on, and dermis meaning skin. Hence, it's the bit that's on top of your skin. There are also oils and such that are secreted onto the epidermis and have antimicrobial properties. But for the most part, if microbes get past your epidermis, it's bad news, which again is why you should disinfect wounds before dressing them. Further, the actual proteins involved in immune response, that is antigens, antibodies, and cytokines, aren't enzymes. So yet again, Roger is just pulling stuff right out of his colon.
And wait, I'm going to show you an article that took me about 1,000,000 years to read, but it was worth it.
I feel like he didn't read it, at least not in the sense of knowing what the words meant and being able to then correctly explain what the article was about and said. Let's get into the ATP Wikipedia page.
Okay, I am just going to make this as simple as I can make it, and it is simple.
I disagree.
There's this, what's called ATP, all right? It's a certain chemical. It's called an enzyme.
Only in a very broad sense. It is better understood as a store of chemical energy which most cellular processes use to power their functioning, which in a roundabout way does facilitate chemical interactions, but it is not the ATP specifically that is facilitating the reaction. So calling it an enzyme is a bit odd. The Wikipedia page itself does call it a coenzyme, meaning that its enzymatic action requires an actual enzyme. So it's not completely wrong to call it an enzyme, it's just not what is usually meant by that term.
And it provides the energy to do everything in every living cell. It does muscle contraction, nerve impulses, chemical synthesis, breakdown of everything, transfers energy, intercellular energy transfer. It's the currency, the molecular unit of currency for life. It's the most important thing in your whole body.
That's true.
ATP. And I understand it very, very well now. I've been studying it for many years.
I don't think that I've ever seen Roger talk about anything and come away thinking that he understands that thing very well, regardless of how long he claims to have been studying that thing. This man can't tell the difference between a modern statue and a fossil. He thinks the pyramids are made of lungs, and that the carved halls of Petra are made of muscle tissue, and that columns of rock are the beard of a scorpion. And by the way, scorpions don't have beards.
And what's happening is the bacteria.
What bacteria? He's never going to tell us, is he?
And there is a bacteria, or a certain number of bacteria, that create this ATP.
No, all bacteria create ATP, that's how they live, but similarly, virtually all eukaryotic cells do too.
Those are weak or dead. And when you don't, well, they're not going to be completely dead because you have to have some energy to do. But when you get weak, it means you have an insufficient amount of ATP.
Except that, no, you don't really get any of your ATP from symbiotic bacteria directly. You generate it in your own mitochondria, and really, the only diseases that can be explained by lack of ATP are mitochondrial disorders, which are usually genetic.
What creates more ATP is
Mitochondria, if the context is an animal's body. If it's the world as a whole, then yeah, bacteria create most of it, mostly because they're so numerous.
bacteria. The bacteria create the enzymes.
I really want to ask Roger how he came up with any of this, because it's not in the article about ATP on Wikipedia or the earlier article about Interstitium that he had up. Where do these connections come from? Is this just some form of extreme pareidolia that is heretofore undocumented in humans?
Here's a process right here. You got a bacteria.
The singular is bacterium, not bacteria.
And they live in your interstitium primarily.
Nope.
And in the gut linings and all that places. There's certain areas where they live.
Yup, that part is true.
And they digest the food and they do whatever they do.
Yes, and some of it they use to make ATP for themselves, and some of it they leave behind for the animal they live in to further break down and store as lipids and sugars, and some of it is converted to ATP for the animal to use, and that conversion to ATP is done in the animal's own cells with ATP synthase it made for itself.
But their primary job is to shoot out these little ribosomes.
That's a new one. Why would they shoot out ribosomes? They need ribosomes. Ribosomes read RNA and turn that into proteins. What would they do outside of a cell where they're not going to have the RNA or the amino acids to do their one job?
Well, what is a ribosome? See how there's a whole batch of them in here? If that thing died, they'd all go at once.
I guess, yeah, they'd all go at once into whatever environment the bacterium lived in, but that doesn't answer the question of what a ribosome is. A ribosome is a bit of cellular machinery that makes proteins. It is itself composed of proteins surrounding a bit of RNA, and they're one of the most important subcellular components in any living organism. But they're not just shed by cells, since, as mentioned earlier, they can't really function outside of a cell.
And that's what they're seeing, and they don't understand it.
Yeah, somehow I don't think it's the experts who've been studying this for their whole lives who don't understand this. I think it's the guy who can't decide if a rock pillar is actually intestinal lining or a penis, even though it's neither, who doesn't understand what's going on.
What's happening is that species of bacteria is being killed by some invader. And when it dissolves the cell membrane, it flushes the body with these ribosomes.
So the ribosomes are poisonous? What's going on here?
Well, what are the ribosomes?
I know what they are in the real world, but I have no clue what Roger imagines them to be in the fantasy land he inhabits.
Normally, they're supposed to squirt out here like one at a time. Blip, 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 blip.
Nope, normally they stay put inside the cell that makes them, and that is using them to synthesize proteins.
These are the ribosomes. They come out of here. Now,
nope, those are amino acids. The gray bit is the ribosome. You can tell those little balls are amino acids because there's a chain of them that is labeled protein chain, and the chain of a protein is made of amino acids. Further, two of them are labeled with abbreviations for phenylalanine and histidine, which are amino acids. Further, the ribosome is labeled, and it's the gray part with the tRNA and the phenylalanine and the histidine attached to the tRNA in it. Roger is looking at this well-labeled figure and just ignoring the words. Does he not even see the words?
And they come out as protein chains.
No, ribosomes do not come out as protein chains. They construct protein chains out of amino acids. This is very basic, like high school biology level. Even Roger's source contradicts him with its labels. I know he's not blind, so how is he missing it? Seriously, let me know in the comments how you think it is that Roger can look at something labeled ribosome, ignore that, and then say that something labeled something else is actually the ribosome.
And they ball into a ball. And then they do their chemistry. Now, here's what it is. This is the ribosome.
Nope, it's labeled trigger. That is, a representation of a chemical bit that causes the enzyme to start facilitating whatever reaction it facilitates, which is generally not done by ribosomes, but by a whole myriad host of various chemicals and functional groups on molecules. Further, that would make ribosomes much smaller than proteins, but in fact ribosomes are large complexes of multiple proteins, although in this case large is relative and we're talking on a molecular scale.
Alright, so here's a ribosome. It comes out from the bacteria. Blip, blip, blip. Not all at once. There's a ton of them, and they just keep coming out one after another. Now, when they get triggered to do their job, they unsheath. And they turn like this, and I mean they turn exotic. Now, they do two things. They can come to be an enzyme, or they can be a protein.
No, enzymes are proteins. Look at this from the very page this image is on. Quote, basically enzymes are a group of proteins that are able to catalyze reactions. Not all proteins have this property. There are structural proteins, or transport proteins, for instance. Lately, it has been found that some other molecules too have the ability to speed up chemical reactions, but as a rule, only catalytic proteins are called enzymes by scientists. End quote. All he had to do was scroll down a little and actually read the web page he's visiting. A bit further down, and it says that proteins are made of amino acids, which means they're not made of ribosomes. This is almost as dumb as when Roger thought he could see different parts of photons, which are electrons, which were themselves made of dark matter something, and an electron, making electrons somehow both massless and also of infinite mass, since they're recursive. This is a man who has never once actually thought through the implications of a single thing he says.
They both unsheath, and all of those particles turn into enzymes or proteins. They're both the same thing.
No, just like ducks are birds, but some birds are not ducks. Enzymes are proteins, but not all proteins are enzymes, although many are.
One breaks and one builds. That's the only real difference.
Wrong.
And they look like this. And if they're not exactly like that every time, they don't work.
That's not true. Every protein in the world has multiple versions of it that exist in some organism, and they function. Most of a protein structure is actually robust to minor adjustments in the shape and amino acid sequence.
They just don't work. If this one here is like that, it's done. Doesn't work anymore.
Proteins aren't magnet balls, and yes, they do indeed work with many different sequences, something both Roger and young Earth creationists routinely get wrong.
So you have to have the bacteria living to produce these one right after the other.
Except no, most amino acids you need are made by your own cells, and the ones that aren't come from the food you eat. Now that food might be partially digested with the help of bacteria, but the amino acids are in the food already. They're not being produced for you by the bacteria.
And if they die, they will flush the system with this ATP one shot, and they're seeing that as maybe a problem. Well, it is a problem because the bacteria is dead, not because you're being flushed with the ATP.
Okay, so hold on. First we're being flushed with ribosomes, and now it's ATP. Does Roger think that ATP is the same thing as a ribosome? And that ATP is what makes up proteins, which are not enzymes, and enzymes which are not proteins? I have trouble imagining how more wrong this could possibly be. I'm sending this to Dan Stern-Cardinal of the channel Creation Myths before it even comes out for early access, because he needs to share in my suffering.
ATP is going to go out of the cells when they die.
Well, yeah, generally the contents of a cell spill out when it dies.
Now, the new research, they basically have it backwards, but at least they understand the layers of the membranes and which layers are being disrupted and causing bacterial death.
I love how he says that the researchers have it backwards when Roger hasn't managed to correctly interpret a single image he's used as an illustration. In fact, I don't think I've even seen him correctly interpret any image. And in case you're wondering, the rock to the right of his monitor is something he claims is actually a petrified goose head, on the grounds that it kind of vaguely looks like a goose head.
This layer was never even known was here. It's the interstitium, it's the fluid-filled highway.
No, it's not. that seems to be the interface between the living dermis and the non-living epidermis of the skin. The interstitium is barely even visible because he hasn't scrolled down enough. It's the light spaces in the bright pink layer. And those spaces have been known about for decades, although they were poorly characterized until much more recently.
That carries all of the bacteria and ribosomes, enzymes, all that stuff.
No, it doesn't carry ribosomes, and while there probably are bacteria in there from time to time, its purpose is not to transport bacteria. But it does transport other things like proteins, so saying enzymes is not too far off. Roger is 1 for 3 if I'm being generous to him.
And they go to wherever they're needed to attack invaders.
No, that's white blood cells. Neutrophils help contain bacteria, fungi, and just general weird grime that might get into you. Lymphocytes recognize viruses and use antibodies to contain viral outbreaks. Basophils are the dicks responsible for allergies. Eosinophils help with parasites and cancer. None of these are bacteria. They're your own eukaryotic cells.
All right, see, they're seeing this as really being backwards. The bacteria hold the ATP and release it as necessary.
First, no, ATP is stored in your own cells, made via ATP synthase, made in your own cells, ribosomes, and produced in your own cells, mitochondria, with ATP synthase, your own cells made. Second, while it's true that bacteria help you digest food to get energy out of it, what they're doing is breaking down hard-to-digest chemicals and leaving behind easier-to-digest chemicals like simpler sugars, shorter-chain proteins, and the like. Cells in your digestive tract then finish the job of making everything into the sugars and other nutrients your cells can directly use to produce their own ATP. ATP is produced and used in-house in cells. It's not generally something exported or imported. I have no idea how Roger reached any of these conclusions, although I suspect that he thinks that because the interstitium is ill-known, he can simply claim any layering in rock that strikes his fancy as interstitium and then claim that this is evidence of his all rocks are giant fossils nonsense. I doubt he's thinking that consciously, though, but that's how delusional thinking works. And the longer I go on listening to and watching Roger, the more and more I think maybe he's just delusional. But if he is, he still has a larger audience than I do, many of whom seem to have been sucked into his delusion. So it's still important to point out why and how he's wrong. Now, I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a therapist, or anything like that, so I can't diagnose Roger. And these are just my opinions about what might explain his bizarre beliefs.
But when they die, they just release it all at once. So they're saying instability of the outer bacterial membrane, the outer membrane towards the skin.
Jeez, no! The skin isn't a bacterial membrane. The outer membrane is the side of the lipid bilayer cell membrane that faces the environment, as opposed to the inner membrane, which is the one that faces the cytoplasm-filled interior of the cell. Now, I tried to find this source, but it's an email to Roger, and searching for text from it does not turn up the original source. So all I can say about what's going on is what's on screen. But let's read a couple sentences from the email. Quote, "It remains unclear whether loss of ATP results directly in bacterial death, or bacterial death is the direct result of impaired outer bacterial membrane stability and ATP release is secondary to bacterial death. However, since the inner membrane and ATP generation remains intact and the periplasmic space is considered generally devoid of ATP, the latter seems more likely." End quote. Well, since ATP generation isn't confined to the inner membrane of the skin, whatever that would be, and since we know what we're talking about is periplasmic, or near the cytoplasm, Roger is wrong in interpreting this as anything to do with skin in particular. The disturbing thing, though, is that this seems to be a compilation of block quotes from who knows where, combined with absolutely insane ramblings from a fellow delusional traveler of Roger's. The top line reads, quote, "IMO, they are talking about membrane fascia interface, inner bacterial membrane. Doctors do not understand how fast enzymes work, and only bacteria create them. ATP synthase enzyme does over 1 million years of nucleophilic synthesis in 1 second. End quote. Also, the fascia is a sheath of tissue that surrounds muscles in animals, and is absolutely not a bacterial membrane in any way, whether inner or outer. So this is just a whole lot of word salad. It's a little bit scary to me that Roger has apparent peers in lunacy sending him emails that just further push his delusions.
That outer membrane, that deterioration because it's being invaded.
Except that the source, whatever it is, doesn't talk about invasion. It talks about bacterial death and associated ATP release, and maintains that it is ambiguous how the two are related, and has nothing to do with invasion. The only part of this that even approaches anything Roger is talking about is that bacterial death releases ATP, which becomes extracellular ATP, something you don't normally see much of, which in cases where bacterial populations are growing exponentially, can be present in significant quantities. But of course, nothing that Roger is talking about indicates that he has exponential population growth in mind. So none of the scenarios he's talking about would result in significant amounts of ATP release. This is just using papers in pop sci for free word association, and then the results of that being treated as the gospel truth of geology and biology.
We have seen from this associated report in 2019, it is associated with bacterial death and ATP release. It remains unclear whether the loss of ATP results directly in bacterial death or the bacterial death is the direct result of impaired outer bacterial membrane.
Wow, okay, so he's reading that bit that shows that this isn't at all what he's talking about. Amazing. This man has the reading comprehension skills of a stale pancake.
And the secondary bacterial death. However, since the inner membrane, the below membrane,
again, no, we're talking about cell membranes, not your skin,
remains intact, is considered generally devoid of ATP, the later seems more likely. So in other words, you're being invaded from top down.
Something not even hinted at. Look, let's talk about what actually happens. So ATP is produced in bacterial cells and in mitochondria, which fundamentally are the remnants of symbiotic bacteria that have become part of the cells of eukaryotes. Each cell generally makes its own ATP, and the cells do not generally rely on extracellular sources of ATP. Although since biology is weird and messy, I'm sure there are some small exceptions somewhere. Proteins are long strings composed of amino acids, which are assembled in ribosomes. And some proteins are enzymes, which are chemicals that either speed up a reaction or lower the activation energy for that reaction. ATP synthase is a protein that is also an enzyme that speeds up the formation of ATP. Other proteins have other functions, like transport of chemicals in the case of hemoglobin, or maintaining the structure of an organism, like collagen. Bacteria are not a significant part of your immune system, which is based on your own cells. Your skin and fascia do have membranes, but they're extracellular membranes, not the cell membranes that are being talked about when biologists talk about bacterial membranes, or inner and outer membranes. I felt like I needed to lay out what all these words really mean and how they're associated with each other or not, all in one place. Because with Roger, it's easy to get lost in the deep dives into the mouth of madness that Roger can lead you down, and so you stop seeing the big picture.
So when we look at this membrane,
which is actually the outer surface of the epidermis, not the interstitium, the fascia, or a bacterial membrane, okay.
You're getting invaded from the outside coming in. I don't care what it is, your organs, your skin, whatever.
I mean, yes, most infections do come from outside and then enter your body.
It's got to get through this layer. That layer has those enzymes that create the ATP and the energy to fight off the invaders.
Nope, although your skin does have antimicrobial proteins and protective glands that secrete things like lipids to help protect you mechanically from infection by microbes.
And when they break through that membrane, they see that ATP flushes everywhere because it's the bacteria that was holding it died.
So he's right that your skin is a vital part of keeping you safe from infection, but it's not by being covered in ATP synthase, which wouldn't help anyway, because it needs to be in a cell to make ATP anyway. Plus, what stops the invading bacteria from just using that extracellular ATP that Roger imagines is in some abundance as their own snack?
And it released the ATP enzyme.
Okay, even if that is how any of this works, which it's not, what do the infectious bacteria do with the ATP, or what does it do to them? How does extracellular ATP help or hinder an infection? What's the actual proposed mechanism? Without any of that, Roger doesn't even have an idea. He just has a word salad with some heavy bullshit dressing.
Not that the ATP enzyme...
ATP is not really an enzyme, at least not on its own.
Caused the issue. The ATP enzyme is now just being flushed through the system because the bacteria that held it just flushed it because they died.
But what is it supposed to do? How does that affect anything?
This is really simple.
I'm glad Roger finds this so simple, but if it's simple, you'd think Roger could explain what precisely he's talking about.
Ribosomes, the little blue balls here, are inside of the bacteria, which is the source of the enzyme.
Well, ribosomes are in all modern cells, and they're the source of all proteins with the exception of those made by ribozymes, which are bits of RNA that can form protein chains on their own. But that's mostly a laboratory thing. In the wild, it's basically all ribosomes. And in regards to ATP, what the ribosomes make is ATP synthase, not ATP.
Those little balls come out and create the enzymes.
Nope, they function inside the cell because that's where the amino acids are, and it's also where the proteins are mostly needed, inside the cell.
So if all of these bacteria died, they'd just flush the system with ATP synthase
And basically everything else they have inside them.
from these ribosomes, and that's what happens. Now they see it as backwards. This is because of the death of the bacteria. The invasion through that upper membrane kills the bacteria flush the ATP synthase, which is inside these ribosomes.
Well, the ribosomes make ATP synthase, they don't store it, but what exactly is backwards? I'm starting to feel like I need a Roger translator.
This is how it works. You got the bacterial cell.
I think this is the first time today that Roger has pointed to something on screen and then correctly identified what it is.
And these are all these little dots in here are the ribosomes.
2 for 2 on correct identifications. He's starting a streak. Let's see how long he can keep it up.
The ribosomes come out and they normally create the ATP synthase.
Well, if we ignore the phrase come out, then yes, he's finally got something right. Ribosomes are protein factories and ATP synthase is a protein. So yes, it's made by ribosomes.
Inside this ribosome, it just unfolds. It's like a big long ball like this that comes out in that little ball.
This is a diagram of ATP synthase. It doesn't look much like a ball to me, but it does look a little bit like a motor, and it does spin, so it actually acts a little bit like a motor.
All right, let's go back to the little ball and how it comes out.
That's normally something that just happens as you grow up.
All right, these are the ribosomes. See ribosomes? They come out and make enzymes. Yep.
Holy crap! Was that his wife? He also inserted a jump cut there. What do you think they talked about? Was his wife yelling at him to stop all this stupid stuff like CC from Westchester County's wife? Let me know in the comments.
All right, concentrate on this.
Okay, so it says in what looks like the AI summary, quote, in essence, bacteria utilize their ribosomes to build the protein enzymes that carry out a wide range of essential biochemical reactions within the bacterial cell, end quote. And this is in response to the query, do bacteria create ribosomes that carry enzymes? So this is an AI trying to correct Roger's misunderstanding, but because AI outputs are built with the assumption that someone who's not completely unhinged will read them, it's just further reinforcing Roger's incoherent ideas. The least surprising thing about this is that Roger actually thinks the AI response is worth a damn, instead of being what it is, a virtual Shoggoth wearing a human mask that tells you what it thinks might be a reasonable response to a query or statement.
Ribosomes, which I'll show you in a second, build the protein enzymes that carry out a wide range of essential biochemical reactions in your body.
Weird how it doesn't say in your body, it says within the bacterial cell. Even Roger realizes on some level that what he's showing doesn't say what he needs it to say, so he just changes it. If Roger didn't seem so sincere and crazy didn't seem like such a good explanation, I'd say he's lying. As it is, I think it's his brain scrambling to maintain the delusion.
You don't have those, you're going to go down and go down quick.
I'm not sure if by those he means ribosomes or enzymes, but yeah, it is true that if you lack either of those entirely, you're going to be dead in seconds. Of course, I've never heard of anyone losing all their enzymes or ribosomes. I'm not even sure how it could happen.
So what happens? A bacterial cell has a DNA signature in there that says, I'm going to make a certain ribosome.
It isn't a DNA signature, it's an actual physical loop of DNA. And all the ribosomes created by a cell are going to be exactly the same. There isn't some kind of menagerie of ribosomes all making their own particular products. They're general protein synthesis machines. That's kind of why they're useful. You feed any ribosome RNA, and they all spit out the right protein as coded for by that RNA.
And it squirts out these little balls,
which, remember, are amino acids in a chain.
of protein chains. They call them polypeptide chains. Some of them are real long, some are real short. It depends on what they're doing.
That's true.
Also, I think that makes Roger 3 for 3 on correctly identifying things from that diagram this time. I'm honestly impressed, especially since he got these things wrong about this very same picture earlier in the video.
And what they do is they come up and they transcribe into RNA.
I know all those words, but I have no idea how they work together in that sentence. That doesn't mean anything as near as I can tell.
This is the immune system.
It's no more the immune system than it is a Ford F-150. It's just a diagram of how protein synthesis works at a very basic level.
But in addition to that, they create things that break things. These are things that make things, that create new programming in your DNA.
Wrong, 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 wrong.
That's not true at all. Information flow in protein synthesis is from the DNA to the protein, not the reverse. Nothing going on in protein synthesis is going to feed back to the DNA to reprogram it, except in the sense that there could be a weird interaction that causes a mutation, but that's not what's supposed to happen, and it's not predictable when and where it will happen, or even if it will happen. I don't think that Roger knows what DNA is or what it does.
This is messenger RNA. This is totally natural. It has nothing to do with vaccines or...
mRNA is indeed natural, and it's not just from vaccines. Further, it cannot be read back into the DNA, which is why anyone telling you that a vaccine is going to change your DNA is an idiot who should not be listened to, and worse, is a clear and present danger to all around them and to society at large. Medical misinformation kills people, and I'm not surprised at all that Roger has either fallen for it or is sympathetic to it. This stuff is not harmless nonsense. This is dangerous.
Any of that stuff. It happens all the time when you get exposed to something your body wants to fight back against. It programs a bacteria.
Nope, the thing that gets programmed is generally killer T cells. They can learn to recognize pathogens, basically through trial and error, and then attack them. They are cells produced from your own body and are eukaryotes, not bacteria, since you're not a bacterial colony. You're a multicellular eukaryotic organism.
To say, hey, you see that thing again, take care of it. What if you don't have the bacteria? You can't program it.
I guess technically it's true that if you don't have bacteria, you can't program them, but you also can't program them if you do have them, which is rather why they can be a problem when they're in places they don't belong, like your interstitium.
And where does that bacteria live? Right in this layer, primarily in the membranes.
He doesn't even know what that layer is. This is amazing.
And now they realize this. Invasion through the top membrane is when you get a serious issue with ATP.
Okay, he's just repeating himself now. He rambles on for a bit, once again reading from AI summaries and failing to even come close to understanding them. And he says that only bacteria can create enzymes, which is not anything that the AI summary says, and it certainly isn't true.
This is not hard to understand. We're missing the bacteria, so we're missing the enzymes, so we're missing the biology and the chemistry.
You know, I agree with Roger. This isn't very hard to understand, which is why it's baffling to me that he doesn't understand it. And then he's back to repeating himself for a while, with a surprising number of jump cuts.
All right, there's good news and bad news.
All right, Roger, hit me with the news.
The bad news is glyphosate is a herbicide, and they've engineered the plants, the good plants that we eat.
I did not cut out a segue to the topic of Roundup. There was a jump cut, and boom, here we are.
To absorb that stuff and not die, so we end up eating the glyphosate.
I mean, you should wash your vegetables, but the impact on human health from a poison that acts by stopping photosynthesis, something humans don't do anyway, seems to be fairly minimal in the doses that consumers are going to get. I wouldn't chug a bottle of Roundup, but the evidence that you're going to be significantly harmed from incidental exposure to glyphosate is pretty weak. That being said, I want to repeat, wash your veggies, because it'll not only get rid of glyphosate, but other more harmful pesticides, dirt, bacteria, etc. will also be removed. On the other hand, you generally should not wash meat. That tends to just spread bacterial contamination.
Because it can absorb it and it won't die. But other things will die from it, and our bacteria in us will die.
I've never heard of any study even hinting that glyphosate will negatively impact your internal bacterial microbiome. Generally, the risks associated with it are cancer, endocrine disruption, gastric distress, and neurological problems. I guess the gastric distress could harm your gut bacteria, but mostly by expelling them in bouts of diarrhea. I also want to point out that the current consensus is that glyphosate has not been shown to be carcinogenic. However, the European Food Safety Authority disagrees. On the other hand, European agencies have not found evidence of it being carcinogenic. I'm not an expert on any of this, but I find the evidence of Roundup being a risk to health that is significant compared to things like having a poor diet or smoking to be weak, but not absent. I don't think glyphosate is going to be the next big health crisis, but we should be careful with it, as we should with all pesticides.
So what do we need to do? We need to have a database.
Containing what data? A list of bacteria?
We can get out of this. This is not a big deal. We can have both, have our cake and eat it too, so to speak. The bacteria and an enzyme database. That's what we need.
But what do you do with such a database?
We need to know what bacteria is killed by what glyphosate or any of that stuff. And then we just need to supplement it.
Okay, so the idea is that we keep a list of which bacteria in the human body are killed by which other substances, and then when you consume the substances that kill the bacteria, I guess you take a pill or something that has a culture of that bacterial species. If anything he had said earlier had even been close to correct, I would have to admit, this might actually make sense. But since it's built on literal nonsense, this wouldn't help much with anything. That being said, it would be nice to have all the bacteria normally found in the human body in a database, along with things that can cause harm.
So we have to do a survey of the kids when they're born, immediately when they're born, what enzymes and bacteria do they have in their bodies?
Why? What do kids have to do with this?
And just keep doing that right along. This is not a big, hard thing to do. And we should be able to do this with a cell phone, taking a picture of poop, and it should be able to analyze it with AI. We're going to be talking about that. Anyway.
I'm sorry. The AI is going to figure out what bacteria and what enzymes are in your body from a cell phone camera picture of a turd? This isn't CSI where you can just zoom in on a picture and enhance. Figuring out things like that requires chemical tests, not just a low-quality picture from a cell phone camera. AI isn't magic. It can't pull data out of thin air. It's just a pattern recognition and pattern replication machine. Now, that's not to say that it can't be useful for diagnostic purposes. It can be. But only if it's actually fed data that can be used to make a diagnosis in the first place. And generally, snapping a picture of your shit isn't diagnostically useful.
Test toxins. Let's test them against these bacteria. What toxins affect what bacteria? And we can see. This is not a hard thing to do.
Roger has absolutely no idea how hard that is. He hasn't worked in a lab studying bacteria. He has never cultured bacteria. He's never tested for potential toxins. He's never gathered bacterial samples in the wild and then had to isolate out different species of bacteria from those samples. So it's certainly possible to study which chemicals affect which bacteria. Saying it would be simple is just unfounded. Bacteria are not easy to study. That's why it took so long for humans to even figure out that they existed.
And then whatever we find from these tests, we get bacteria pills. We can ferment these bacteria and make them grow in vats. We don't have to have them in poop or in your digestive system or inside your body, I don't think.
Roger doesn't know what fermentation is. It's a digestive process that microbes perform. He seems to think that fermentation is microbial reproduction. It's not.
And the brighter minds than mine can do this, I'm sure.
Well, there aren't many other kinds of minds.
And they create bacteria pills, which would dissolve at different zones in your body. One of them would dissolve, well, you could have toothpicks. I was just seeing something the other day. They're talking about having a toothpick for getting your dental bacteria back in you. And
the thing there is that the idea that you might need to replace bacteria in your body is not crazy on its own. That's why fecal matter transplants exist, which Roger has already mentioned. And if I'm being honest, if I needed more bacteria in me, I'd rather take them via pill than by having someone else's poop shoved up my butt. The problem is that Roger seems to think that this is a panacea for all infections. But it's not. It won't help with any infections, because infections are not caused by a lack of bacteria in your body. Rather the opposite in many cases.
You could dissolve going down your throat into your your stomach. It could dissolve into certain types of pills. Other ones dissolve after they get through the stomach. And somebody's got to engineer this stuff. But they would have the prebiotics in addition to the probiotics.
Prebiotics are things like insoluble fiber. They're things you can't really fully digest. They're not bacteria. Once again, we're back to Roger just not knowing what the words he's using mean, but simply making up his own meanings based on what they sound like. It's like this man is a living incarnation of the concept of pareidolia. It's frankly amazing.
So you would just continue to regenerate the stuff that's being attacked by these environmental toxins.
It seems he can't tell the difference between infectious organisms and environmental toxins. In case it's not clear, toxins are not living things, but bacteria are. Viruses are a bit on the fence between being alive and not, but are generally not considered toxins. Toxins are particular chemicals, and viruses are made up of multiple chemicals in complex biological arrangements.
And I'm not just talking about, these herbicides and so forth. There's all kinds of environmental toxins that nobody even knows about.
Yeah, that's true, and it's a real concern, and people are looking into identifying new toxins. But what won't help is a fundamental misunderstanding about the very basics of biochemistry, infectious disease, and the immune system, and even what DNA is.
Because the whole earth is covered with different chemistry. I'm just telling you, it's not homogeneous. There's all kinds of different chemistry. And if you live in one area that has a certain chemistry, it would be interesting to see if it affects your bacteria.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I'll give him that.
But all you got to do is get an enzyme database.
I think Roger thinks that each kind of bacteria is responsible for a particular enzyme and that they're the only source of enzymes, and so an enzyme database would also be a de facto bacterial database. None of that is correct.
Starting at birth, going up. It's going to change, and it changes significantly as to what bacteria are in your body as you age. And as you age and get older, the bacteria become less vibrant.
You heard it here first, folks. When you age, your bacteria turn gray, whatever the hell that means.
So, and in addition to that, the vaccines, I like vaccines. I think they're fabulous. However,
this has the same energy as I'm not a racist, but
your body has to have enough resistance to it to overcome it to create. Immunity. You create the immunity because you have some resistance to it. A kid that has no resistance whatsoever, you give him something that attacks him and it's a live virus, it's going to attack.
Yep, that's why the immunocompromised generally can't get vaccines and why it's so important for everyone else to get them. Those who can't be vaccinated rely on the majority to be immune, so that they are simply never exposed to the dangerous pathogens most people are immunized against. Getting vaccinated not only protects you, it protects people with immune disorders, AIDS, and people being treated for cancer. It's one of the most pro-social things you can do without actually needing to significantly interact with other humans.
And it's going to destroy those membrane outer, and then it's going to attack it and kill the bacteria, and then you end up with having a lot of issues. And that starts right at a very, very young age. These are the kind of things I'd love to talk to Kennedy about.
As if RFK isn't already brain-rotted enough, please keep Roger away from anyone in the government, especially aggressively and dangerously stupid people in the government like RFK.
If you have any access to him, I would like to speak to him. I have some serious information about this.
No, he doesn't, but that's also how the video ends. I don't even know what to say. That might have been the worst understanding of biology I've ever heard anyone evince. And I say that having heard Kent Hovind try to describe sexual reproduction. This was mostly incomprehensible, and while it was a nice change of pace to get away from creationism, I might have to dive back into creationism now, because at least the things that creationists say usually count as ideas, unlike what Roger often says. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please hit like on this video and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, then hit dislike and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe if you haven't, and turn on all notifications so that occasionally YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. And remember, if you want to support what I do, please consider joining the channel memberships or the Patreon. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Tapioca Weasel, Arrow Dodger, Dan Sheedy, Eleron Teller, Phil Rivara, Ian Chen, Joshua Geese, Kelvin Brostic Van Manen, Landed Knoll, Regios, Sphincter of Doom, The Plastic Mouse, Volus, North Texas Fossils, and John Ackerman. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.